Hey there, history buffs. Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating chapter of American history. In 1775, 13 British colonies in North America ignited a war for independence that would forever change the world. This was the American Revolutionary War, a struggle that spanned 8 years, reshaped global politics, and paved the way for a new nation. But how did these distant colonies come to rebel against the mighty British Empire? In today's video, we'll dive deep into the events, battles, and key figures of the American. Let's start with the causes of the conflict. Throughout the 18th century, Britain largely left the American colonies to govern themselves. But things changed in the 1760s after the costly 7 Years' War. To recover from the immense debt, Britain imposed a series of taxes on the colonies, including the infamous Stamp Act and Tea Act. These taxes sparked outrage among the colonists, who argued they had no representation in Parliament and therefore no say in how they were taxed. The slogan "No taxation without representation" became a rallying cry. Colonial protests intensified, leading to acts of rebellion like the Boston Tea Party in 1773. That night, a group of patriots disguised as Native Americans dumped an entire shipment of British tea into Boston Harbor, protesting British taxation policies. In retaliation, Britain passed the Intolerable Acts, which restricted colonial freedoms and heightened tensions. By 1775, tensions had reached a breaking point. On April 19th, British troops marched toward the towns of Lexington and Concord to seize weapons and ammunition stored by the colonists. What they didn't expect was that local militias, known as Minutemen, were prepared to resist. The first shots of the war were fired at Lexington. While it's unclear who fired the first shot, this was the spark that started the Revolutionary War. The British troops were forced to retreat after facing intense resistance from the colonists. This is often referred to as the Shot. With open conflict underway, the colonies realized they needed to form a united front. In June of 1775, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia, and one of their first decisions was to create the Continental Army. They appointed a Virginian planter and experienced military officer, George Washington, as its commander. Washington faced a monumental challenge. His army was poorly trained, under-equipped, and often on the verge of collapse, but his leadership and resilience would become crucial in. One of Washington's first major actions was the Siege of Boston. In March of 1776, his forces managed to force the British to evacuate the city, marking an early victory for them. Even as the war raged on, many colonists still hoped for reconciliation with Britain. But by 1776, it became clear that a peaceful resolution was impossible. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress formally adopted the Declaration of Independence, drafted by Thomas. The Declaration not only proclaimed the colonies' separation from Britain, but also articulated a bold vision for human rights and democracy, stating that all men are created equal. This document would become a cornerstone of American identity and influence movements for freedom across the world. The war continued, and not all battles were in favor of the Americans. They suffered defeats, particularly in New York. But in 1777, the tide began to turn with the Battle of Saratoga was a pivotal moment. American forces under General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold defeated the British in a decisive victory. This victory was significant not only for morale, but also because it convinced France to join the war on the side of the Americans. French military and financial support would prove crucial in the later stages of the war. However, in the winter of 1777-78, the American army faced one of its greatest challenges at Valley Forge. With food and supplies running low, Washington's army endured a brutal winter. Many soldiers died from hunger and disease. But under the guidance of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer, the army was retrained and became a more disciplined, formidable fighting force. As the war dragged on, the British shifted their focus to the southern colonies, hoping to gain loyalist support and crush the rebellion there. However, they faced fierce resistance from both regular troops and local militias, using guerrilla tactics to harass British forces. Figures like Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, led small bands of fighters in Hit Hand. The final decisive moment of the war came in 1781 at the Siege of Yorktown. British General Charles Cornwallis had entrenched his army in the town, expecting support from the British Navy. But Washington, along with French forces led by General Rochambeau and the French Navy, surrounded Cornwallis' forces, cutting off any hope of escape or reinforcement. After weeks of siege, Cornwallis was forced to surrender on October 19, 1781. This victory effectively ended the war in favor of the Americans, though fighting would continue in other areas for a time. It was the symbolic and practical end of British efforts to retain control of the colonies. 2 years later, in 1783, the war was officially brought to a close with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States, and the boundaries of the new nation were drawn. The American Revolutionary War was a long and difficult struggle, but it resulted in the creation of a new nation founded on principles of liberty and democracy. The legacy of the Revolution lives on today, inspiring movements for freedom and self-governance around the world. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of the American Revolutionary War. If you found this video insightful, be sure to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you don't miss our